Welcome to another edition of Innovation Unedited. I'm your host, Sasha Whitaker, a sophomore at Macaulay Honors College at City College. Today we continue our discussions on the recipients of Nobel Prizes, specifically those who have studied at the City University of New York. We are coming to you today from the lovely green room of WHCR 90.3 FM, the voice of Harlem. This is the on-campus radio station at City College. With us here today are all of the honors students in Macaulay's Seminar 3, Science and Technology in New York City, led by Professor Angela Lampoussis with help from ITF Aaron Kendall. Today I welcome Laura Benasaraf. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Laura's going to talk to us about the work of Arthur Kornberg, who won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1959. So Laura, could you please give us some background on the biography of Arthur Kornberg?
Sure. So Arthur Kornberg was born in 1918 in Brooklyn, New York, to immigrant parents, as many people were in those days. And he attended Abraham Lincoln High School in Brooklyn, and then he got his undergraduate degree in chemistry from the City College of New York in 1937. After that, he went to the University of Rochester, and he became a doctor. And he initially trained as an internist. It was really interesting. He didn't think of going into research. Like, he trained to be a regular internist. He had no idea what he was going to do when he started college. And then as soon as he graduated, he joined the United States Public Health Service because it was the beginning of World War II. Mm-hmm. He served as a doctor on a Navy ship for 6 months. And then he was recruited by the National Institute of Health to do research for them. And the research he was doing, he didn't find it particularly interesting. He was working with rats in the laboratory, and he just didn't like it. So he switched his focus to working with enzymes, and the National Institute of Health actually asked him to start an enzymology lab for them because they enjoyed his work so much. And he trained under a couple of noted scientists, one, Severo Ochoa, who he trained under at NYU School of Medicine. And this is important because he ultimately won his Nobel Prize with this man.
So the beginning of a collaboration there.
Yes. He worked under others. He worked under a couple called the Coreys. And then in 1959, he made his big discovery for which he won the Nobel Prize. And what this was he was studying E. coli, the bacteria, and he was looking at their genetic material, and he was wondering what made DNA replicate, what made it divide, what made it go back together, and where RNA came into this. And so we know his discovery now as DNA polymerase I. So he was the one who discovered what made the pyrimidines and the purines of DNA come together and come apart.
So a very basic concept, but one that's so much the foundation for any other studies in genetics and DNA and cell replication. So very important seminal work.
Yes. So his Nobel Prize was for the discovery of this mechanism for the replication of DNA.
Excellent. So I assume that would lead on to many more discoveries of foundation for research.
Everything we know today about DNA and DNA replication couldn't have been done without DNA polymerase I. It's the first step.
Interesting. So could you tell us a little bit about, you mentioned it earlier, the collaboration between Arthur Kornberg and any other researchers in this field?
Yes, so specifically with a professor called Severo Ochoa. He was a Spanish immigrant who worked at NYU School of Medicine, and he really was the first one to really introduce Kornberg to enzymes and how they work. And Kornberg notes him as like his main influence for his work, and ultimately they did win their prize together.
So nothing can be done independently then.
Yes, exactly.
So lots of mentorship and guidance in that relationship.
Yes.
Very important. Do you have any other facts or stories you'd like to share about Arthur Kornberg?
Yeah, I do. So he actually had a really interesting quote that I found, and he was really famous for this. He used to say that about, genetics and DNA and things like that, and enzymes, you had to isolate the actors with which you can then investigate the dramas they perform. Every element of like a scientific study, every single little piece is important, and each piece needs to be studied by itself. But you also need to put everything in the context of your whole experiment, in the context of the whole molecule, because ultimately all those pieces are working together. And this is just, I found it a really interesting point, especially when you think about how his work nowadays is used primarily in figuring out chemotherapy treatments for people with cancer or people with viruses like AIDS. And that's really how we see his work today, mostly.
So with any sort of drug or pharmaceutical that attacks the genetic code of a cancer cell or a virus, all this further study was on the foundation of his initial research.
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. And a very apt metaphor for understanding the processes of different elements working within the DNA of the cell. Very interesting. Thank you so much, Laura.
Thank you.
We've been speaking with Laura Benasaraf on the work of Arthur Kornberg, the recipient of the Nobel Physiology Prize in 1959. I'm your host, Sasha Whitaker. Thank you so much for listening.